Hello and welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of topic six with looking at the rise of Austria, Prussia, and Russia in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. Um, One event that you need to know something about in the context of what was going on in Western Europe in the 17th century was the 30 Years' War, which did last for 30 years. It was actually a series of conflicts that mainly centered in what's now Germany. Lots of reasons why the emperors during this time period of the Holy Roman Empire became very weak. They couldn't really hold the states together. There were growing religious tensions between Protestants and Catholics, particularly non Lutheran Protestants and Catholics. And so that whole piece of Augsburg that we talked about with Martin Luther was falling apart. And the Bohemians, who were what now the modern Czechs, were chafing under Austrian rule and they wanted their own independence. They tended to be Protestant. And so this is what really set the conflict off. So it was really a series of things, but mainly ethnic tensions and religious tensions. This was a very, very devastating war. Lots of mercenaries were used, soldiers for hire, and these soldiers usually weren't motivated by anything except for greed. So very often they attacked not only the people that they were paid to fight against, but also the side that they were paid to fight for. Lots of death. As you can see from the notes, about a third of Germany's population died in this conflict. So it was very devastating. Almost every country in Europe was involved with it except for England. But the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the war, actually brought about some significant changes. The main thing is that France emerged from this as the dominant power in Europe. They defeated Austria and were able to start that process of becoming a global power for the next century. It did destroy the power of the Holy Roman emperors, and it made sure that Germany was going to continue to be weak and divided for the next couple of centuries. They weren't anywhere near the process of unification, which France liked just fine. Austria developed an absolute monarchy fairly early on, within within the 16th century, 17th centuries. Austria, though, had an empire, a territory that governed a lot of different various groups of people. They were many languages, many ethnicities, many cultures, many laws. So the process of being able to unify wasn't quite as strong in Austria as it was in other places. The most significant ruler of the Habsburg dynasty I want you to know something about is Maria Theresa, who came to the throne as a teenage girl. She was immediately attacked by the Prussians, who wanted to take an area called Silesia, which was pretty rich in coal and iron resources from Austria. This was a global conflict that pulled all the countries in Europe and their colonies into this conflict. The Prussians did win this war, but one of the things that this war did do is it served as a catalyst to make people unify to defend a teenage girl and her throne. So this played on people's macho sensibilities, and they rallied around the throne and around the queen, around the empress. And this is one of the things that helped pull them together was that loyalty to the royal family. She did create a very, very efficient bureaucracy that made Austria powerful in the central part of Europe. The Prussians, who are a group of Germans that live in what's now northeastern Germany, they developed an absolute monarchy fairly early on too. The dynasty were called the Hohenzollerns. The most famous of these is Frederick II, who became known as Frederick the Great. He created probably the most efficient, well organized, and powerful military of the 17th century on the mainland of Europe. Very, very professional army that actually formed the template that other countries started to model, including the United States. We actually had a Prussian military officer come over and train our troops during the Revolution. So they also had a very, very efficient bureaucracy as well. So these two countries, which were or states in Germany, I should say, um, were rivals of each other, very similar in some ways, particularly with their organizing pattern. but they are going to be major competitors for the next couple of centuries. Russia also developed an absolute monarchy fairly early on. Their dynasty were called the Romanovs. There's two Romanov rulers that I want you to be familiar with at this point. One is Peter the Great, Peter the First. He is responsible for wanting to westernize Russia, to bring Russia up to what was going on within Western Europe. Russia had been isolated for a long time by the Mongols. They were behind culturally and technologically, and he wanted to catch them up. So he imposed westernization on the Russians, and we're going to talk about some of the things that he actually did. Another thing that he wanted was a warm water port, which he finally was able to achieve with defeating the Swedes in the Great Northern War and taking control over the Baltic Sea and building the city of St. Petersburg on the Baltic Sea, so that they could have a port that was open year round and not iced in. The second ruler that I'd like for you to know something about is Catherine the Great, who was married to the grandson of Peter the Great, if I remember correctly. She was from Germany, but she became Russian very, very quickly and was responsible for really pushing the boundaries of Russia eastward and really starting to establish the Russian state as we knew it going into World War One. So even going so far as to partition Poland. Poland during her time period ceased to exist. The Germans, the Austrians, the Prussians, and the Russians all divided the state up, and so it disappeared until after World War One. There were five great powers that start to develop in Europe by the 18th century. Um, these were Austria, Prussia, France, Britain, and Russia. All of them had started to develop strong centralized governments, and all of them were involved in this dance that's called balance of power. Since they all had global territories, every single one of them had, except for Prussia, had colonies in other places. And so that is going to pull all these countries and all these places into war whenever there's a conflict. So there starts to be what we would now call world wars that are starting to happen. And probably the most significant one was the 7 Years' War that we'll talk about more within the context of the United States and the British colonies. So that concludes lesson 2. I will see you when we pick back up with lesson 3. Thank you.